I feel privileged to share my views on this platform today. Um, since we have professionals and students from various backgrounds, so rather than presenting some technical information, I would like to highlight certain key aspects um, of urban green conservation, which we all know, but yet we tend to forget. And despite knowing its significance, we end up ignoring them due to various spatio-political reasons that stand as our limitations. So we all know how much we depend on natural resources, and today urban environments are polluted to an extent that pure air and clean living conditions are a luxury. They became a luxury in cities. So if you look at the global ecological footprint, the ecological footprint is nothing but a metric that measures human demand on natural capital, given that there is a limitation for regeneration capacity of Earth. So in 2021, the ecological footprint is for an average, in average for a person is 2.71 global hectares, whereas the biocapacity is 1.63 global hectares. So there is a deficit in the pattern we are consuming our uh, natural resources. It shows that the rate which we are consuming resources is way more faster than the rate the earth is regenerating resources, and which is pushing us into a deficit period. So the earth overshoot day is nothing but a day on which we are completely consuming or exhausting our natural resources and entering the deficit period. So we can see here on 1970, we took an year to complete our natural resources that earth is regenerating in a year. And slowly, as the year passes by, the deficit period is increasing. Whatever the reasons might be, maybe the population is increasing, or maybe we are consuming more resources to maintain nature like environments, or in our attempt to build nature like environments in polluted urban environments, maybe we are ending up consuming more resources. Whatever the reason might be, we are entering deficit period faster year by year. And on 2020 we can see the overshoot day, it's postponed a little bit due to the lockdown and very decrease in the carbon emissions. Coming to India's ecological footprint on 2021, it's 1.16 global hectares per person, whereas the biocapacity of Indian landscapes or Indian region is 0.45. We can see that the green line is the biocapacity per person, whereas the red line shows the ecological footprint, which is increasing year by year. And we can also notice that there is a decrease in the biocapacity per person. So if this figure explains us how the human settlements are actually transforming our natural landscapes. If we try to understand, there are two basic entities or features, two basic features in our ecosystems, which are biotic and abiotic. And we all know that these biotic features are interdependent on among themselves, and also depends on the abiotic features, which are nothing but our environmental settings. So the in natural landscape, the consumption patterns is there is an equity in the consumption of natural resources by the species in natural landscapes, including man. Whereas in urban scapes or in cities, man is also consuming resources not just for his physiological needs, maybe for his luxuries, maybe for other Maslow's other needs, which Maslow's triangle or pyramid of needs explains. So, and what's happening? How we are ending up, or how this transformation is affecting our landscapes is this human-centric transformation is resulting in an encroachment of our local biodiversity. And we can see that the only species which are well adapted to our urban settings are seen irrespective of geographical location and climatic zone. So this human-centric approach, where keeping man at the center of urban design, or while designing open spaces, or while planning open space systems or green systems, green infrastructural systems or green networks, if we keep man at the center, then we are actually harming our local biodiversity, and in return we are harming ourselves. So this timeline explains us how the idea of conservationism evolved over the pre and post industrial revolutions. In the pre-industrial revolution era, the issues are generally, I mean, they are deforestation as a result of agricultural practices and preparing for the launch of industrial revolution. So the idea of conservationism revolved around the protection of forests and tree cover. And during the industrial revolution phase, where consumption of fossil fuels to generate energy is increased and mass migration to factory towns is observed, and the inefficiency in the in the management of disposals from industries, which led to air and water pollution and leading to an unhealthy living environment, are the major issues observed during the industrial revolution phase. So the conservation revolved around fighting the industrial pollution. Though we focused on stopping our natural systems being polluted from our industrial waste disposal, we didn't actually, the adverse effects on environment weren't seen as, they were seen as localized and short-lived. We didn't take them seriously. And in some regions, environmentalism is also seen as a romanticism. Now, today, the conservation idea is based on a utilitarian conservation, preservationist conservation, and wildlife habitat protection. These are the three major principles on which we based on and build the idea of conservation is built or evolved from. So it actually focused on the ecological conservation, green growth, our practices and sustainable approaches in development, energy efficient strategies, circular economy, conservation of lakes and catchment areas, efficient urban service provision and management, environmental equity, environmental justice, urban ecology. So it completely changed from just protecting the urban green or urban forest, from developing or transforming our urban systems into resilient systems which can adapt to mitigation um, uh, and flexible enough to adopt the change. So urban green conservation demands a systems approach to address these issues that we face today in cities. So now coming to our Indian context, what India is exactly doing, and what India is focusing on through its climate mitigation strategies and sustainable practices and conservation practices, it can be clearly and easily understood from the assessment framework it adopted. This city center for climate center for cities is launched by Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs to drive the climate action in cities. So it's a self-assessment framework which cities can assess their results of their greenhouse gas mitigation. So we can see that there are 5 parameters it focused on, which are mobility and air quality, waste management, water management, urban planning, green cover and biodiversity, energy and green buildings. So The first assessment done by the Climate Smart City Assessment Framework has recommended certain, gave some recommendations to the smart cities or the cities of India, which under these 5 indicators, it assesses the climate smartness in the Indian cities under these 5 indicators and gave some recommendations. The 5 indicators are the rejuvenation and conservation of water bodies and open spaces, urban biodiversity, and proportion of green cover. Sorry. And if we see that these 3 parameters fall under the climate adaptation and disaster resilience and city climate action plan. These 2 fall under climate mitigation. So it's actually targeting both the strategy, both the aspects. So the rejuvenation and conservation of water bodies and open spaces assess the extent of conservation of urban environment to decrease the urban heat island effect. So it recommends the cities to consider the transformation of urban green that's happening in the cities. So it asks the cities to consider look at its master plans and see how the green spaces are transforming, how the green networks are maybe being fragmented by the new development projects. So, so, so by referring the master plan, it recommends the cities to understand or assess the conservation and also plan the strategies in the master plan level itself to conserve the water bodies that can combat the urban heat island effect. And under urban biodiversity, it assesses the extent the city is acting for protection, conservation, and management of urban biodiversity. So it asks these cities to maintain an inventory of urban systems. It asks cities to understand what character of biodiversity exists in their cities and what's happening to them. How are they changing? How is the biodiversity is being affected across the timeline? And it asks the cities to regularly monitor as well as mitigate the impact of human interference into the or urban activities, interference of urban activities into the local biodiversity. And under the proportion of green cover, it measures it's nothing but the percentage of green cover in the urban region or in the urban development region. So it considers both the natural and planted vegetation. So it's just a metric which measures the percentage of urban green cover. And under climate mitigation, we have disaster resilience and city climate action plan. So under disaster resilience, it recommends cities to prepare a disaster management plan, considering the detailed ward level hazardous vulnerability and capacity assessment. So it asks cities to reflect the local microclimatic conditions and disaster resilience into their bylaws, development control regulations, codes, and build cities a bit more resilient for any change and flexible enough to adapt to the change. So it asks the city administrations to update this disaster management plan on a yearly basis. And under the city climate action plan, it shall be developed as a comprehensive implementation plan covering all sectors. So we can see that an inclusive approach being adopted by Indian local bodies. Maybe at least the attempt starting to adopt an inclusive approach in climate action, where it's considering waste management, integrated water management, mobility, air pollution, energy and green buildings, biodiversity, green cover, disaster risk preparedness, urban planning, and others. So an inclusive approach is a right step towards the mitigating the climate change at local level. And there is another index, but if we can notice, if you try to see, if you try to look at the urban planning, green cover and biodiversity indicators, it talks more on conserving the biodiversity regions. It stresses more on the percentage of green cover. That's it. It doesn't talk about what's happening to urban green network. It doesn't look, it doesn't adopt a systems approach. It's just seeing the metrics or percentage of green cover. So let us try to understand what urban open spaces and urban green spaces actually cater to in cities. So if we see, there are two primary needs it caters to: urban open spaces as well as green spaces. One is socio-ecological needs of human being and ecological needs of biodiversity. So urban designers or planners or architects, when if I request them to adopt approach which considers local biodiversity as well when we are designing open spaces. So and based on the needs it caters to, we can frame the objectives while designing the urban green systems. So minimum open spaces per capita, which are accessible and well managed to accommodate the social interactions, cultural activities, and ecological needs of the human beings. So this is catering to the human needs. And looking at the biodiversity needs, conservation of local biodiversity, well-maintained green networks to allow the species to maintain, sustain, and regenerate their vital cycles. So we should redefine the human-centric approach to an approach which considers both the human and the local biodiversity, and design for a coexistence where both the human and local biodiversity can sustain and can cohabit in the urban regions. So based on the if we try to understand, urban open spaces and green spaces are only spaces which allow man to interact with nature from cities. So considering the interference of man in urban regions, we can categorize the urban green spaces into three categories. One is high degree of human interference, moderate degree of human interference, and no human interference. So if we see, under no human interference, we have green spaces like protected areas, urban forests, conservation zones, natural reserves, and green belts. So these are the areas which are strictly protected and conserved, and which are where no human activity is allowed, where no spaces are designed for human activities. And in moderate degree of human interference, under moderate degree of human interference, we have gardens, biodiversity parks, where we can see spaces where for man as well as for the local biodiversity. And high degree of human interference, we have parks, playgrounds, and urban open spaces where majority of spaces are designed for human socio-cultural activities. So if we try to understand what type of issues these spaces are facing today, fragmentation of habitats and encroachment of local biodiversity, these are the two major issues. Our urban area, protected areas, urban forests, conservation zones, and where no human interference is there, this is the major issue these type of spaces are facing. And management of coexistence, where properly managing the coexistence of both the species is a major challenge for moderate degree of human interference. And for spaces where there is a high degree of interference, the common issues are the accessibility and insufficient green spaces. So these are the common issues we can identify. Rather than generalizing the issues to urban green spaces overall, we can categorize the spaces in terms of human interference, and we can identify what issues these spaces are facing today in urban regions. Yeah, if we see the pictures here, this is the landscape with high patch connectivity, and this is the landscape fragmented by the road, reducing the connectivity. So now this gives the idea, or this helps us to understand how the human settlements are fragmenting the habitat. Now, if we see the percentage of green, it's same here, almost same. And if we see the areas that are being conserved, might be almost same, but it's definitely breaking the network. So, considering the percentage of open spaces alone can be a um, risk, and we can it will be very difficult for us to assess our strategies in addressing the local biodiversity issues. So green network systems are widely seen as key mechanism for reversing the effects of fragmentation on biodiversity. So it requires a systems approach, considering the entire green spaces as a single structure and a single system as one of the subsystems of urban systems, and approaching and developing strategies could be an ideal approach. So the adoption of a green networks approach offers a more effective strategy over simply increasing the amount of green space. And they emphasize the interaction between species and landscape structure in determining organism movement among the habitat patches. This is a small theoretical concept, which is a patch corridor matrix, which says that every point on the landscape is either a patch, network, or a background matrix. It's patches are nothing but the nonlinear areas or nonlinear surfaces or zones whose landscape is different from its surrounding landscape. So now in our context, these patches are green landscapes, which are differing from the surrounding landscapes which are urban landscapes. And networks are the linear elements which often connect these patches. And from structural perspective, they sometimes might not be connecting patches, but they do facilitate the survivorship and species movement when we look at the functional perspective. So this figure explains us. This is the condition of our urban network systems in our in our um, cities today, where we have broken networks, not well distributed green open spaces, fragmented conservation zones, etc. Whereas this is what we want to achieve, where everything is the green open spaces are integrated well, and which is allowing or species movement, and which helps the regeneration of biodiversity in our urban areas. So our vision forward should adopt a systems approach and consider the entire urban green structure while developing a conservation and climate mitigation strategies. And it is necessary to consider. And while designing, we usually end up focusing on spatial aspects and ecological aspects while designing strategies for urban green spaces or urban open spaces. But it is very important to consider the local norms and spatio-political aspects as well, because they might end up as limitations when it comes to the implementation phase. So it is important to consider spatial, ecological, socio-cultural, and political dimensions of green systems, urban green systems. Thus, which implies that strategies need to be localized. A centralized so when strategies and programs are formulated at central level, they cannot be directly implemented as it is, and cannot be copy pasted everywhere. So it is very important to localize our strategies and concepts which suits to our local conditions. Um, Thus, considering local political framework is very important from designing phase. So the objectives that's the vision forward, and the objectives of urban green management plan is to combine biodiversity and social networks. So since our open spaces are not just for man or not just for biodiversity, so we need the coexistence, we need the cohabitation. So to combine biodiversity and social networks with other social and environmental data sets, and then identify opportunities for improving the extent and usability of urban green networks for biodiversity and people.